the time over to Doug to do his presentation. And if you want, you can watch it live on YouTube. But this way, you have the ability to interact with us and ask questions, all of that.
Here.
Okay, there we go. Now we are live on YouTube. Today's presentation is Housekeeping by Doug Folsom.
Thank you, Jason. Appreciate that. I know that housekeeping may not sound like the most exciting safety topic, and maybe it's something that often kind of gets pushed to the back as being not necessarily essential. If there's something we can't get done today, you know, maybe picking things up a bit is the thing that doesn't get done. However, housekeeping is a very important factor when it comes to safety. And so we'd like to take this time today to talk about how housekeeping affects or impacts our safety in the workplace, as well as, you know, some information about how to be safe when it comes to housekeeping. It's really an all-encompassing topic when we're talking about safety, because aspects of how well we keep our facilities impacts our safety in a myriad of different ways. There is a direct relationship between clean, neat, orderly workspaces and a safe workplace. And when we're talking about good housekeeping, when we have this in place, it helps us eliminate a lot of different kinds of accidents, as well as fire or other property or equipment damage that can happen as a result of the hazards created in a messy environment or a less orderly environment. When we have good housekeeping, it helps us maintain a safe and healthy work environment. It helps us save time and money and materials. We're able to work more efficiently and with a higher quality of work when we have good housekeeping in place. And one thing that I think we would all agree on is that when you have a clean space to work in, that it also helps you feel better. You know, you feel better about yourself, about the work environment. And so there are impacts on morale as well when we have good, clean environments. I think some of the big impacts on morale sometimes are when we are subject to, you know, some disorganization or messes that aren't our own, you know, that there's somebody else made in our work environment, but that does have an impact on how we approach the work environment and how we think about it. And also when we have a good, clean, orderly, neat workplace, work environment, it reflects an image of a well-run, successful organization where things are being done right. And you may not be perfect at everything. You may not be doing everything exactly right, but if we've got good organization and a good, clean environment, you know, there's definitely going to be that perception that we are doing things the way they're supposed to be done. And that's of great value to us as well. On the other side of the coin, you know, when we talk about poor housekeeping, what can result from poor housekeeping? Obviously, there's different kinds of accidents. Slips, trips, and falls are a common byproduct of poor housekeeping. Fires can also be a byproduct of poor housekeeping. Accidents that involve chemicals or our machinery can be a byproduct of poor housekeeping. Sometimes there's electrical issues that arise as a result of poor housekeeping. Falling objects, you know, depending on how well things are stored, you know, on shelves and racks overhead can be an issue, and just general health problems caused by unsanitary or unsafe conditions in the work environment. Just think about, you know, air quality, dusts or molds or other things that may be in the work environment that we need to be concerned about as well. One of the most important things that we can do when it comes to good housekeeping is to develop some habits. And so some habits that we can think about that will help us have cleaner, neater, more organized work environments that are safer to be in would be, number one, making time, setting aside a certain amount of time every day to do some basic, you know, housekeeping. Set aside a little bit of time at the end of the day is really good to make sure that we leave the work environment in a good, clean, safe condition, so that when we're coming to work the next day or the next shift coming in is coming into a safe environment as well. Another good habit that we can develop for housekeeping is to, you know, take a look at our workspaces before starting work and throughout the day. Look for those slip, trip, and fall hazards, objects that have been left on the floor, things that are out of place. You look for those fire hazards, the combustible materials that are piled up someplace, maybe near an ignition source, machine hazards that may exist, or sometimes you may have sharp, jagged edges or objects, in the work environment that could be a hazard as well. Have an eye out for those things, especially as you're getting started and doing that pre-work evaluation, but really throughout the day, evaluating the safety of your work environment. Remove those hazards that you identify before you start working. And when they creep up throughout the day, make sure you address them. Don't put them off, to take care of them at the end of the day. Let's make sure that we clean as we go, so to speak. Also, if we can turn our equipment off when we're not using it, that's going to be important for helping us keep that equipment safe. And keeping people safe around the equipment. Make sure that equipment is ready for the next time it's going to be used, and have it in a good, safe condition when we're ready to use it again. I mentioned clean as you go and never ignore a hazard. And sometimes this is one of those things that gets a little bit frustrating, because sometimes it's the other guy who will leave something where it doesn't belong, and we don't want to be picking up after everybody else. But whether not ignoring the hazard means we stop and pick it up or take care of it, or we get the person responsible for it and make sure they take care of it, or say something to our supervisor, and supervisors, address the issue and make sure that we stay on top of these things. That's really important for making sure we have a safe work environment. Don't leave those hazards to fix them later on. Let's take care of them right now. Another thing that we can do that will really help us avoid accidents in the workplace due to poor housekeeping is having inspection forms that we do, inspections that we do of our work environment, on a regular basis. And some of those may be daily, some may be weekly. But we should have some checklists that we run through that remind us of things to look for example, on the floors, the things on the floor that don't belong on the floor, that are out of place. How about our walkways and aisles? Are they clear, or do they have obstructions and trip hazards on them? Or how about our stairways? How about our emergency egress? Are our paths to get out of the building clear and unobstructed? Is your workstation clean? Is your equipment in good condition and clean? Are your storage areas? And storage areas can be something where we get a lot of potential hazards. Sometimes we're storing hazardous materials in there, whether it's chemicals. Sometimes there are waste products that we're storing, such as straps or plastic or cardboard from equipment and supplies that we've unpackaged. How are we managing that storage of not only those items that can create a slip or trip hazard, but it also may contribute to a fire hazard, for example. And so how are we managing the disposal of waste and garbage that's produced throughout the day and during our work processes is very important. There's common injuries that may occur as a result of housekeeping, and probably the most common one is the slip, trip, or fall injury. Slip, trip, and falls are not just the most common hazards when it comes to poor housekeeping. They're just probably one of the most common type of injuries we have, period. But definitely housekeeping contributes to these. And there's a number of types of injuries that can happen because of a slip, trip, or fall. You can have sprains or strains, and sometimes these don't even require that you fall. Sometimes you just slip a little bit, and that jerking sudden motion of you tensing your muscles to catch yourself and regain your balance can cause a sprain or a strain. Often there can be torn ligaments from a slip or a fall, and that is extremely painful and can take a long time to heal. Falling to a hard surface can result in broken bones. Falling to your back or on your neck can result in spinal injury, which can result in pain or even in disability, in being paralyzed or something like that, which would be horrible. And then death obviously can also occur because of falls. In fact, in the United States each year, tens of thousands of people, are severely injured or die as a result of falling, whether it's at work or at home or in other areas of their life. So let's talk about some things we can do, especially with regards to housekeeping, that will, number one, help us prevent the slip. Be sure to make sure and clean up Spills. If you've got something leaking, if you've got a piece of equipment that's leaking, or you've got some plumbing or pipes that are leaking, or you have some storage containers that are leaking, let's make sure and address that leak and repair it, rather than just accepting that as being something normal in our work environment, that, you know, that lift has a hydraulic leak and there's always a little puddle of oil there by it, so I'll just, you know, be careful around there. We don't want to do that. We want to fix these issues. We need to have the proper materials on hand to clean up these leaks as well. Paper towels may be great for cleaning up water, but if you've got oils or some other chemicals that are leaking, you may need some other type of absorbing materials or process for properly cleaning up that leak. So make sure that you know how to clean up that leak appropriately and address it, not address the leak and address the spill also. Picking up trash. I mentioned this already, you know, we get accumulations, whether it's paper or plastic or cardboard, these things pile up, and these can create slip hazards in addition to other hazards as well. But you just get a little piece of plastic or a little piece of paper on the floor, and you step on that piece of paper or plastic may have a totally different coefficient of friction between your foot and the ground, and you'll slip a lot easier on it. So making sure we pick up, you know, garbage and anything that's on the floor as we're working. Sweeping up debris, sometimes, you know, light granular materials, and it could be, you know, chemicals, it could be, you know, fertilizers or different things. It could be sawdust, you know, on a smooth concrete surface can be extremely slippery. So making sure we keep our floors clean and sweep those up as we go. And wearing the proper footwear is also very important. And I want you to remember, you know, just any old boot with a heavy, you know, cleated type, you know, sole isn't necessarily going to be slip resistant for the surface that you're working on. You know, slip resistant outside walking on rocks or in the mud is different from slip resistant indoors on a smooth concrete floor that may have water or oil or some other material on it. So make sure that you have the proper type of shoes to give you the best traction for the surface that you're walking on, as well as what kind of contaminants may be on that floor. And there are specific types of shoes and soles for that that we can pay attention to. Preventing the trip hazards. Again, cleaning up things, picking things up off the floor. The things that you could slip on could also be things that you trip on as well, like bands or straps that you've cut off of a box as you're unpacking some equipment or supplies. Someone could get entangled in that. Making sure you put tools and other equipment away as you go when you're finished using them, instead of leaving them out on the ground or the floor where you were using them. Make sure they get put in a safe place where they're not creating a trip hazard. Cords and hoses are huge trip hazards that we often have in our shops. And so we can prevent trips by making sure that those aren't across walking paths, and that when we're done using those cords and hoses, that they get reeled back up and off the floor so that they're not a trip hazard. These also can contribute to other hazards too, that can occur when these cords or hoses get damaged because we leave them out on the floor. And we'll touch on that in a second. Stowing your equipment and tools. Again, when you're done using them, pick them up, put them away. And that helps protect the tools and the equipment and keep them in good working condition, as well as preventing them from becoming a trip hazard. Drawers and cabinet doors are also things that we want to make sure that we keep closed. Don't stack things on your stairways or in your marked walkways, obviously. And that's a common one we see, not just the marked walkways, but especially stairways. I don't like seeing, you know, bottles or boxes or, you know, tools or things left on a step or on a stairway, because obviously if you have a trip on the stairs, your fall is going to be farther than if you're tripping from the same, you know, surface that you're standing on. So be really careful with that, you know, and again, close drawers and doors so that they don't become trip hazards that we walk into. When you're carrying objects, make sure that you don't block your vision of where you're going while you're carrying those boxes and putting things away. Make sure that you can see your walking path and be able to watch out for trip hazards that may affect you as well. Preventing falls in the workplace. You know, good housekeeping can help us prevent falls by, you know, number one, like I mentioned, not stacking stuff on stairs. So be careful about your housekeeping around stairs. Keep things off those steps. Good ladder safety is another thing. You know, we want to use the right ladder for the job. We want to make sure we inspect that ladder before we use it. Make sure we're setting it up properly so it's safe to climb on, and to know how to climb on the ladder safely. So I'd remind you and refer you to your ladder safety training. But also I'd like to remind you that often it's not just how we use the ladder that can be the hazard, but it's, you know, where we keep the ladder that can be the hazard. Often it's if we've got a ladder that we use to climb up into, say, up to a shelf to get something off a shelf regularly, we'll just leave that ladder out all the time in that place. And that ladder is a hazard because it can easily be knocked over and could hit somebody, or could be a trip hazard because it's generally going to be set up someplace where we're walking normally. And so making sure that we put the ladder away in a safe place is also important housekeeping for safety. Maintaining your fall protection. If you've taken down the safety chains on a guardrail or a barrier, make sure you put those back in place, you know, after you've gone through that barrier, through that guardrail, so that the next person coming by has that protection in place. If you have to use something for fall arrest equipment, make sure you're using the proper equipment and inspect it to make sure it's in the proper condition. And make sure you store and take care of that equipment properly as well, because if you keep it, if you just throw it in the corner, you know, it could come into contact with some tool that could nick it or damage it, and then make that fall arrest equipment unsafe to use as well. So it's not just how we use the equipment, but it's also where we put it away, how we store it, how we keep it in good condition so that it's safe when we use it. Good housekeeping also plays a major role in preventing possible fires in our work environment. For example, you know, you should store flammable liquids in a proper container for the flammable liquids, but you should also use a flammable storage cabinet for those flammable liquids that you keep inside your building. So these flammable cabinets can help prevent sparks from getting to these flammable liquids and starting a fire. It can also help keep these flammable liquids away from a fire that may be burning outside of the cabinet. And so it's really important to keep those flammables inside that cabinet. That's good storage. It's good housekeeping. It also helps protect us, you know, in the case of fire. Make sure you close the door on that flammable cabinet, because that is very important. The flammable cabinet doesn't really do you a lot of good as far as preventing fires if you don't close the door on it. Also, you may have chemicals that may be reactive. They could be chemicals that are exothermic. In other words, they may, you know, react and produce heat, you know, when they come into contact with the air or with room temperatures. And so if you've got any chemicals that may be reactive either with the air or with other chemicals, you need to know what that is. So it's extremely important to be familiar with the safety data sheets on your chemicals, know what the hazards are, know what the first aid procedures are, what the cleanup procedures are, what the PPE is for those chemicals, you know, and know what proper cleanup procedures are if that chemical does get spilled. But that's another important one, is making sure that we're storing and caring for those chemicals appropriately. Again, picking up trash can help us prevent fires. If we get a lot of cardboard stacking up, you know, maybe not just a day's worth, but weeks worth of cardboard from unpacking, you know, equipment, tools, or supplies, then we have a significant extra combustible load in the building, you know, that can catch on fire real easy. So that paper, plastic, cardboard, let's keep the amount of that is in our work environment, especially if it's used packaging that we're already done with, let's keep that to a minimum inside the building. Let's move it out to the appropriate disposal sites for storage and disposal as quickly as possible. Limit your combustible materials, you know, so that may also include wooden pallets that you have. Sometimes we see lots of stacks of wooden pallets or other wooden or combustible materials. If it's something it's already been used or we don't need it, you know, let's find ways to limit the amount of that we keep in our facilities. And storage in and around our electrical service panels, as well as electrical equipment or hot equipment, is very important. Be careful not to store any of your combustible materials, you know, cardboard, paper, files, other, things, or even trash that near a furnace, a water heater, in front of an electrical circuit breaker panel. All of these are potential ignition sources. In addition to that, we want to maintain our electrical equipment to be relatively dust-free as well, as that can also be a combustible material if you have an accumulation of dust. Good housekeeping also helps us prevent injuries, due to fire by helping us keep our means of egress open, or our access to firefighting equipment to prevent the fires or to put a fire out. Always keep your egress routes, your emergency evacuation routes clear. Don't store boxes or other items in the aisles or hallways or stairwells that are your emergency egress, because that can limit the number of people and how quickly they can evacuate the building. Make sure those exit doors are not blocked, either on the inside or the outside. We want to be able to get out the door, but we also need the door to be able to open for that to happen as well. Make sure you don't chain locked any of your emergency exit doors. Also, accessible fire extinguishers. Your fire extinguisher needs to, be visible. You need to be able to get to it. Make sure you're not using it as a coat hanger or to hang hoses or cords on or anything else. Make sure that it's visible and that you can get to those fire extinguishers easily. Make sure that you don't stack tools or supplies or equipment in front of the fire extinguisher that may block your ability to reach the fire extinguisher or to be able to see that fire extinguisher. Also, your electrical panels are important in case of a fire. If you have an electrical fire, you may want to shut down the power to that equipment that's on fire, or if you just may need to be able to shut down the power to an area that's on fire altogether. And so access to that electrical panel is very important. Same thing as your fire extinguisher. You need to be able to see it, you need to be able to reach it, you need to be able to access it. So make sure you don't block those panels with storage of materials or hang things on them or so forth. And also, when it comes to your fire suppression, not only do we want to be able to get to our fire extinguishers if we need them, but if you have fire sprinklers in your facility, you want to make sure that that fire sprinkler, when it goes off, is going to have a spray pattern that can get to the fire and put it out. And so we need to keep the storage, vertical storage, at least 18 inches below the bottom of the sprinkler head, so it doesn't block the spray pattern of those sprinklers. Good housekeeping contributes to chemical safety. We've mentioned chemicals a couple times already, but if you're practicing good housekeeping, you'll make sure that your chemicals are put in proper labeled containers, okay? Either with the original label on them or a secondary label that has the appropriate identification and warning information on it. So that you know the hazard associated with those chemicals. Keep those containers closed so that they can't get knocked over and spilled. Make sure that you, again, are familiar with your safety data sheets. That gives you a lot of information on safety, first aid, cleaning up spills, proper storage, the hazards that are associated with specific chemicals, safe handling, PPE, and so forth. So make sure you got good labels and you have your safety data sheets. You're familiar with that information. Inspect the containers for damage on a regular basis. When you go into your chemical storage area, just take a look. Do any of the containers look damaged? Are they leaking? Are there any cracks? Is there any spilled material, that's out on the ground that we need to address? And make sure that you have the appropriate PPE to handle those chemicals, when you do need to clean them up or when you're using those chemicals, of course. Safe storage and handling is very important. Your safety data sheet will give you information on temperatures or reactivity or, different chemicals that you shouldn't be storing that around, for example, and you need to be informed and up to date on that information. Again, clean up spills and leaks, as soon as you find them. Don't let them just stay there. Machine safety can also be impacted by housekeeping. Keep the area around your machinery clear so that you don't have obstructions or things that you may get tangled up on, or that your work process may get tangled up on or impeded by because of housekeeping. So keep those areas around your power equipment and machinery clear. Let's keep, combustible materials moved out of the way, slip and trip hazards and other debris. Let's make sure we inspect the machinery before we use it to make sure it's safe, that the machinery itself is safe to use, but that the area, the work area around the machinery, make sure that that is also safe and in good condition. Make sure your machine guards are in place, attached, and properly functioning. Follow proper lockout tagout procedures if you're going to be servicing or repairing machinery, or if it's not safe to operate. And also make sure that your machinery is clean, and that your tools and other supplies and equipment that you're using in association with that machinery are properly stored before, during, and after the use of that equipment. Electrical safety is also affected by good housekeeping. Don't overload your circuits. Lots of times we see just tons of cords. What can we do to limit the number of cords that we're using? And how can we make sure that cords are distributed so that we're not overloading, one circuit in one area, which creates, trip hazards as well as fire hazards as well. Inspect those cords. If we've got electrical cords that we leave out on the ground a lot and we're walking on them or we're rolling equipment over them, those cords will get damaged. And the insulation could get worn through, or even the wires exposed, creating potential sparks for a fire hazard or electrocution hazard for us as well. So good housekeeping and maintaining those cords and keeping them put away properly and making sure we're not overloading them are all very important safety aspects. Keep, again, combustible storage away from your electrical equipment near any kind of ignition source where a spark could occur or where there is heat being generated. And make sure that you are cleaning your electrical equipment. Let's try and keep excessive dust from building up inside, electrical equipment as well. Covers, outlet covers, switch covers, circuit breaker panel doors should all be, in place or closed. So that any sparks that do occur back there, are contained, and also to help prevent damage from occurring to the electrical components themselves or excess dust getting inside of there. So if you've got broken outlet covers, switch covers, let's get them replaced. If you're missing a junction box cover, or your electrical circuit breaker panel, doesn't have a door, the door's open, let's get that closed. If you have any open slots for circuit breakers in those panels, they need to be blanked out. So again, so dust doesn't get back inside there, so fingers don't get back inside there, and so forth. Good housekeeping can help us prevent cuts and scrapes, which can be serious. You can get some serious lacerations, and we want to prevent that. So don't leave objects sticking out into workways or workspaces. Keep an eye out, especially for sharp or jagged objects or edges. It may be a tool, or it may be a surface that has an unusually sharp or jagged edge on it. And we may want to mitigate that hazard by removing that sharp edge, by covering it or getting rid of it altogether. If you have any broken glass or shards of any sharp objects that have broken, make sure you clean that up appropriately. Use a broom and dustpan, wear gloves, and never pick up broken glass with your bare hands. Properly dispose of, sharps. So that they're not cutting people, either handling garbage, if we've got things inappropriately disposed of in the garbage, or just laying around in the work environment. There's a lot of different things we can do. You can have your new blades, your bandsaw blades, circular saw blades, utility knives. If they're new, have them in a labeled box so people know what's in there, so they don't just reach in there and get cut. When we're disposing of these sharp blades, let's put tape over the sharp end or cardboard over the sharp end so that it's not exposing people to, a cut hazard when they're handling the trash. And let's make sure small blades, especially when you're disposing of those small blades, it's a really good idea to keep a container, a hard plastic container specifically for disposing of those sharp blades, so that they, aren't going to inadvertently come into contact with people and cut people, as those are, either in the work environment or in the garbage or what have you. When we are doing housekeeping, we need to make sure that we have the right PPE for the housekeeping that we're going to be doing. PPE also requires housekeeping for itself. One of the things that you're required to do with your personal protective equipment is make sure that it's clean and in good condition and in healthy condition. So inspect your PPE before each use and look for signs of wear or damage or soiling that need to be addressed. Store your PPE properly. Proper storage of your PPE helps keep it in good condition to be able to protect you. If you just throw it in the corner and it gets run into by a pallet jack or something else and it gets damaged, then it's not going to provide you with very good protection. So putting that PPE away where it belongs, where it can be cleaned and safe, helps keep you safe when you need to use it. Make sure when that PPE is damaged or worn out that you replace it and get new PPE. When we're cleaning and doing housekeeping, we may need to have certain, protective equipment such as eye protection, maybe goggles, gloves, the proper shoes, especially, for slip resistance on the surfaces you're working on, for example, or for protection from the chemicals that you may be using, and perhaps dust masks or other types of potential respiratory protection that may be required given the chemicals that you're using. Also, the right equipment, the brooms, vacuums, mops, and sponges have the right tools for the job to make sure that we can do the job safely and effectively. If you have rags that get soaked with oils or greases or things like that, make sure you've got a bucket, one of these rag buckets for those, so that you have a metal container with a tight fitting lid to store those rags in, because they could combust and start a fire. And so we want to keep them in that closed container. And your chemicals, remember that when it comes to cleaning in the work environment, often the compounds and chemicals that we use in the workplace could be industrial strength, and they may be stronger, more caustic than what you're using at home. So make sure that you read the labels on the chemicals, you're familiar with the safety data sheets, and that you're protecting yourself using the proper PPE and familiar with the correct procedures for use and cleanup and storage of those chemicals. And finally, as we're cleaning up around the shop, we're probably going to be picking things up and carrying things to put them away. So just kind of remember basic safety for lifting and carrying things. Before you lift an object, make sure that you have a safe route of travel that's free of obstructions and slip or trip hazards. Make sure that you can get a good hold, a good grasp on that object that you're picking up. Hold it close to your body, lift with your legs, not with your back. Try and keep your back vertical and straight as possible. And also make sure that you can see where you're going. Don't carry so much at once that your vision of your path is blocked. Make sure you can see any objects that may be in your way so that you don't trip and fall while you're carrying those objects. Make sure you can watch where you're going. So in summary, housekeeping for safety, makes sense because it helps us prevent injury to ourselves, to our coworkers. It helps prevent fires. Also, I'd like you to really remember that good housekeeping isn't just about keeping us safe individually. Good housekeeping is about our responsibility to help provide a safe work environment for our coworkers and everybody who's in the facility with us. And so it's not just something that we're thinking about whether I can keep myself safe in here. I also need to be thinking about others and their safety in this environment as well. Keeping the workplace neat, clean, and safe is everybody's responsibility, not just one person. And even if you didn't make the mess, don't ignore the mess. However you're going to determine to deal with those situations in your workplace, we need to make sure that we don't have conditions that are just left alone because one person doesn't clean up after themselves. Keep alert to housekeeping hazards while you work and address them as you see them. Make sure that when that housekeeping hazard arises, that you mitigate the hazard or you do something to it to make it not a hazard anymore. Either get rid of it, remove it, or cover it, or have some plan to make sure that that hazard is no longer going to have the potential to hurt you or somebody else. And that's about it. Any questions out there?
All right, folks, go ahead and type your questions into the chat box and we'll get those answered right now. So we have one question here, Doug. What do you do when you have coworkers who are pigs?
You tell them their mother doesn't live here. There's a distinct responsibility on the employer, and I'm specifically going to put that on the frontline supervisor. Whoever the supervisor is of this employee who's not very cleanly, that needs to be addressed. If you've got someone who leaves messes behind, they're creating hazards and leaving, hazards for other people to encounter, that needs to be addressed. And so, there needs to be some coaching there. And if the coaching doesn't work, it may even come down to disciplinary action. And if you've got someone who's making messes and not cleaning up after themselves, I would totally, support, some sort of action that is addressed at that employee as far as not following safety rules, because keeping a clean, safe work environment is your basic safety rule that needs to be followed by everybody.
Awesome. All right. Looks like that's all the questions that we have for today. Good job, Doug. Thanks for sharing this important information. It really goes along well with the next presentation that we'll be doing just here in just a few minutes, talking about property protection. Doug covered many of those important things that will help us prevent fires and prevent incidents and damage to our facilities as well. So great job, Doug. We appreciate all of your efforts and preparation for this. Folks, if you haven't signed up for the next presentation on property coverage, fires, floods, earthquakes, and storms, all of those things, go to our website right now to utahtrust.gov, click on training and events, and you can sign up there. So we appreciate your attendance here today. Go out and have a safe day.